Welcome back to another edition of the EPS podcast. I am Eric Paul. You can find us on Spotify, you can find us on iHeartRadio, as well as epspodcast.club. This is episode number 10, and therefore the 9th artifact to be analyzed. This one's a little bit different, though, because unlike the previous songs and movies and TV shows and plays, this one might not be quite as mainstream or broadcasted. In fact, it's a Civil War memorial, a monument that went up in 1930, specifically in Milford, New Hampshire. It's dedicated to a young woman by the name of Carrie Cutter, who gave her life during the Civil War as she served as a nurse in the Union Army. And this is different because while there are several plaques and memorials and monuments and statues throughout the country about the Civil War, regarding it, or its individuals who contributed to it, this is not something that is widely mainstream and well known. So therefore, I've completed a video to act as a companion to it that will be posted. A link of it will be posted to the podcast itself here, and you can find it on YouTube on the EPS podcast channel. I hope you enjoy this, and please keep on checking out the EPS podcast, where everything, including monuments and memorials, are a primary source. Recently, while driving around our home state of New Hampshire, my family and I referred to Atlas Obscura, a website which highlights roadside oddities and the like. We were drawn to Milford and its quote-unquote grave with a grudge inside the Elm Street Cemetery, an 1838 marker for Caroline Cutter, used by her husband, Dr. Calvin Cutter, to post a diatribe against the local Baptist ministry. According to local history, Caroline was actually very much alive and present when her headstone was placed, but did in fact pass away a few years later. The term primary source usually refers to things like old newspapers, photographs, and diary entries. Technically, though, the same analytical tools used to acquire clues about the past from those kinds of artifacts can be applied to anything and everything, including cemetery headstones, memorials, and historical markers. This is a very interesting artifact and could be analyzed as a primary source of the late 1830s and used to inform us of the society and culture of that era. But my attention went instead to the memorial plaque from 1930, placed directly in front of the 1838 marker. Memorials and monuments are just as informative about the people who made them than those they are dedicated to. The memorial dedicated to Carrie Cutter, Dr. Calvin and Caroline Cutter's daughter, which was placed directly in front of her mother Caroline's marker, is an exception to this rule, as it actually does inform quite a bit about its subject. Reading like an encyclopedia entry about her service and death in the Civil War, it is far more informative than the standard Union soldier and sailor monuments that New Hampshire towns are familiar with. The informative nature of this monument adds to its value in learning about 1920s New Hampshire society and culture as much as it teaches about Carrie's service in the Civil War. When analyzing any primary source, be it a memorial, a letter, or a personal belonging, it is important to ask a series of questions. What material is it made from, and how was it made? Who made the item? What was their role or status in society, and why did they create it? Where was it made, and who is the intended audience of the piece? The behavior and ideas that the primary source conveys is inquired about next, followed by whether or not the source is prescriptive or descriptive. The answers to these questions will shed light on whatever information is being sought, in this case, New Hampshire society and culture of the late 1920s. From what material is it made? The granite and heavy metal that make up Carrie's monument was chosen to provide a permanent presence for its content. The other materials, which is not tangible, is Carrie's career as an Army nurse in the Civil War. Carrie followed her doctor father into the Union Army as a nurse.
while heroically tending to soldiers on the front lines during an 1862 campaign on Roanoke Island in North Carolina under the command of General Ambrose Burnside, Carrie fell ill and later died. Burnside personally ordered that she be buried with full military honors. The size and durability of the materials makes it clear that this story should not be lost to history. Who made it, and what was their role or status in society? It was installed in 1930 by the Women's Relief Corps, which was the women's auxiliary of the Grand Army of the Republic, the fraternal organization for Union Army veterans. Carrie would have been eligible to join the WRC had she survived the war. It can be assumed that by 1930, any original members remaining had long since passed the torch of the group's functions and even its ideals on to younger members. Originally, the WRC, which still exists, were a veterans group promoting patriotism and charity, with a special focus on keeping their service during the Civil War, primarily as nurses, in the forefront. Their local chapters would be present at fairs, picnics, charity events, and of course, memorial and monument dedications. They also functioned as a women's rights group, standing behind such causes as equal rights in the workplace and universal suffrage. By 1930, the status of these groups and their relevance had been matched by the VFW, which had come about after the Spanish-American War, and the American Legion, which has its roots with the much more recent World War, and their respective women's auxiliaries. Why did they make it? Making such markers had become a major component of the WRC by the late 1920s. The 19th Amendment, which guaranteed women's voting rights on a national level in 1920, was not the culminating event for women's rights, it was a milestone. This marker is evidence of a continued effort to place men and women's historic, present day, and future contributions to the development of the United States on a balanced scale. Where was it made? At first, the location of the marker is a bit curious. It could have been done closer to where Carrie Cutter died, or where she was laid to rest in New Bern National Cemetery in North Carolina. But the motivation to place the memorial directly in front of her mother's marker that Dr. Cutter had made about her in the Elm Street Cemetery in Milford could not be more conspicuous. One cannot look at the 1838 installment without being forced to read the 1930 marker. The WRC clearly wanted to add more to the Cutter family's place in Milford and New Hampshire history. Next to having Dr. Cutter's odd publicity stunt a century earlier completely removed, Carrie's stone tablet was likely installed where it was to detach his daughter's legacy from his behavior and restore the family's name. Who was or is the intended audience? The 1838 headstone drew a large audience, including Caroline herself, when it was unveiled, and it was sure that regular visitors to the cemetery arrived year after year. While not true for the Elm Street Cemetery, which was established in the late 18th century, cemeteries in general had changed much in design and function as they were being created in the years between Caroline Cutter's headstone being erected and the placement of her daughter Carrie's monument. Throughout the 19th century, cemeteries developed along the same lines as city parks, with long winding walking paths, benches and fountains, and sites of people enjoying picnics among headstones was not uncommon. Spiritualism, the religious movement marked by seances and deriving moral guidance from the deceased, had risen in popularity throughout the same time period, and produced regular visitors to graveyards, regardless of their design. Especially throughout the 1920s, when automobile travel was increasing in popularity, there were spiritualists and tourists alike visiting the cemetery and its grave with a grudge on a regular basis. It should be noted that middle and upper class women comprised a sizable portion of the spiritualist movement, organizations such as WRC and weekend sightseers. Therefore, the makers of Carrie's memorial were probably more than familiar with Elm Street Cemetery and its cultural significance. The granite memorial was meant to stand for future generations and their attention as well. What ideas and behavior does the primary source convey? Hoping to set the record straight for cemetery visitors, the WRC laid this informational plaque in such a way that it would quite literally overshadow its predecessor. There is a thread that connects these two memorials, even beyond the family connection. Dr. Cutter who became an outspoken reformer, particularly with abolition, had, like many people in the Northeast, participated in the evangelical movement referred to as the Second Great Awakening. It was the rapidly expanding influence of the Baptist ministry, after all, that he accused of killing his wife, Caroline. The Second Great Awakening is the origin place for so many reform movements of the 19th century. Mankind's spiritual side can be purified, why not society itself, they thought. And this compelled people to apply their religious teachings to address societal ills. The Civil War saw so many reformers put their ideals into action. In some ways, this was a cause for the conflict. Carrie and her father went to serve the Union cause in a medical capacity together. After the Civil War, reformers escalated their efforts, and by the early 20th century, so many of their goals had been achieved or were in the public consciousness because of them. This memorial and its placement demonstrate very well what the purpose of the Women's Relief Corps had become by 1930, an organ to elevate the status of women in American society to be equal with men. Identifying that Carrie was one of many young women who answered their country's call during the Civil War and served to their fullest regardless of a non-combat role. What all of these behaviors and ideas convey is an acute awareness on the part of the 20th century reformers like the WRC of the philosophical roots of their organizations to the first half of the 19th century. Carrie's deeds were the product of the society and culture in which she was raised, and the women who made her memorial in 1930 wanted to assert their direct connection to that era, or their awareness of it at least. By placing their organization's name on the plaque, they pointed out their place on the far end of the same branch of American history as Carrie Cutter. Is it prescriptive, as in does it want you to think or feel a certain way or do something, or is it descriptive? This memorial marker is prescriptive in its overwhelmingly descriptive presentation. The local chapter of Women's Relief Corps could have turned their memorializing efforts in a variety of directions, but by placing such a detailed description of Carrie's Civil War ordeal in the specific location that they did, it is an act of wanting to influence visitors' thoughts. It was understood in 1930, as it is today, that actions, in this case, creating a memorial speaking to Carrie Cutter's heroism, speak louder than words, for those memorializing at least. It should be mentioned that a state historical marker was just placed a few steps down Elm Street from the 1930 Carrie Cutter Memorial, this one commemorating Bernice Blake, a New Hampshire aviator who was a founding member of the women's flying group the 99s, alongside Amelia Earhart, coincidentally in the same time period, 1929, when Carrie Cutter's memorial went up. Blake is given credit for her aerial photography, which was integral in the state's creation of airstrips. In fact, a few of the newest historical markers feature accomplished women of the early 20th century. As asserted earlier, the 19th Amendment was not the end of the journey. It was a necessary component of realizing women's equal status in American life. Just like Carrie Cutter's memorial plaque, these state historical markers are meant to be permanent reminders of the deeds of their subjects. They accomplish this very nicely, but in doing so also inform us in the present, and will continue to explain in the future, the values and attitudes of our society and culture here in the first quarter of the 21st century. The next time you come across a plaque, statue, monument, or any other commemorative marker, consider that just as much or more can be understood about those who placed it as those who they wish to recognize. This is true for all that you see and use each day, as everything is a primary source.